The moment she stepped through my manor's threshold with a crying infant in her arms, and spoke my name, a name she should never have known, I realized my arranged marriage was about to become something far more complicated than mere duty. My name is Gareth Ravenswood, and at 28 years old, I had resigned myself to the practical realities of English society in this year of our Lord 1786. As the second son, who had unexpectedly inherited Ravenswood Manor after my brother's death in the American colonies, I found myself in possession of modest lands, but substantial debts. The solution, according to my remaining family, was as simple as it was distasteful: marry for money and connections. The September morning mist clung to the grounds like an unwelcome shroud as I watched the hired coach approach through my study window. Inside the carriage sat my future bride, the illegitimate daughter of Countess Margaret Ashworth. I had never met this woman, knew nothing of her beyond her unfortunate birth circumstances and the substantial dowry that would accompany our union. The arrangement had been negotiated entirely through intermediaries, a cold business transaction dressed in the language of matrimony. But nothing had prepared me for what actually emerged from that coach. She was not the meek, grateful creature I had expected. Instead, a woman of perhaps 24 stepped down with the confidence of nobility, despite the simple traveling dress that marked her lesser status. Her dark auburn hair was partially covered by a practical bonnet, and her green eyes held an intelligence that immediately unsettled me. Most shocking of all was the infant she carried, wrapped in fine linen despite the early autumn chill. I'd love to know where you're watching this from. Drop your country or city in the comments below. As she approached my front entrance, I found myself frozen by the window, watching her careful but determined stride. There was something familiar about the way she held her head, the precise way she navigated the stone steps despite carrying a child. When my housekeeper, Mrs. Crawford, opened the door, I heard their exchange clearly through the thin walls of my aging manor. "Good morning," the woman said, her voice carrying the refined accent of proper education. "I am Lina Ashworth, here to meet Mr. Gareth Ravenswood regarding our arrangement." Mrs. Crawford, bless her practical soul, immediately noticed the infant. "Oh, my dear, you brought a child. Shall I prepare the nursery? That would be most kind, though I should speak with Mr. Ravenswood first. There are circumstances he should understand." Those words sent an unexpected chill through me. Circumstances? What circumstances could an illegitimate daughter possibly bring beyond the social inconvenience we had already negotiated around? I straightened my waistcoat, ran a hand through my dark hair, and prepared to meet my fate. When I entered the main hall, she was standing near the window where the morning light caught the copper highlights in her hair. The baby had quieted in her arms, and she was speaking to him in soft, reassuring tones. The domestic scene struck me as unexpectedly intimate, and I found myself hesitating at the threshold of my own reception room. "Miss Ashworth," I said, stepping forward with what I hoped was appropriate formality. "Welcome to Ravenswood Manor. I trust your journey was not too arduous." She turned to face me, and the moment our eyes met, something shifted in the very air around us. Her expression changed from polite formality to something I couldn't quite identify, recognition, perhaps, or surprise. More unsettling was my own reaction. Looking at her felt like trying to remember a dream that slipped away upon waking. "Mr. Ravenswood," she replied, offering a slight curtsy despite the child in her arms. "The journey was manageable, thank you. However, I must discuss something of great importance with you immediately." The directness of her statement caught me off guard. In my limited experience with unmarried women of breeding, such forthright conversation was unusual. Most would have engaged in the proper pleasantries, the careful dance of social interaction that served to delay any substantive discussion. "Of course," I replied, gesturing toward the sitting room. "Please make yourself comfortable. Shall I ring for tea? That would be welcome, but first—" She paused, shifting the infant slightly. "Mr. Ravenswood, before we proceed with any arrangements, I must tell you something that may change your perspective entirely." I felt my jaw tighten involuntarily. What manner of something? She looked directly into my eyes, with an intensity that made me take an unconscious step backward. "This child," she said quietly, "is your son." The words hit me like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and I gripped the back of a nearby chair for support. "I beg your pardon? His name is Thomas," she continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was revealing. "He was born 6 months ago, and you are his father." My mind raced through possibilities, searching for any memory that could explain her claim. "Miss Ashworth, I can assure you that I have never, that is to say, we have never." "Haven't we?" she asked quietly. "Think carefully, Mr. Ravenswood. A village fair in Ashworth, nearly 15 months ago. A young woman whose carriage had broken down on the London road. A gentleman who offered assistance and shelter for the night during a terrible storm." And suddenly, with the force of a revelation, the memories flooded back. The storm had indeed been terrible, one of those late spring tempests that turned roads to mud and made travel impossible. I had been returning from business in London when I came upon an overturned carriage blocking the narrow road. The woman inside had been shaken but unharmed, though thoroughly stranded. Her driver had been thrown clear, but injured his leg badly enough that he could not continue. Common decency had demanded I offer assistance. The nearest inn was miles away, through increasingly dangerous conditions. I had brought her to the small cottage I maintained for hunting trips in Ashworth village, intending only to provide safe shelter until morning. But the storm had lasted 2 days. 2 days of intimate conversation by the fire, of sharing meals and stories, of discovering a connection that felt both impossible and inevitable. She had told me her name was Anna, that she was traveling to visit relatives. I had shared more of my thoughts and dreams with this stranger than I had with anyone in my life. And on the second night, as the wind howled around our temporary sanctuary, and the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, we had found comfort in each other's arms. I had awakened the third morning to find her gone. No note, no explanation, only the faint scent of lavender on the pillow beside me, and wagon tracks leading toward the main road. Despite my efforts to trace her, I had never discovered her real identity or whereabouts. Now she stood in my sitting room, no longer the mysterious Anna who had vanished like morning mist, but Lionel Ashworth, my arranged bride, holding a child she claimed was mine. "You remember," she said softly, reading the recognition in my face. "You told me your name was Anna," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Anna is my middle name. I couldn't risk using my real identity. You understand the implications for someone in my position." I stared at the infant in her arms, searching his tiny features for any resemblance to my own. He had dark hair like mine, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they seemed to hold the same deep brown color I saw in my mirror each morning. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Why didn't you find me when you discovered you were with child?" Her expression grew pained. "How could I? I knew nothing about you except your first name, and that you were a gentleman traveling alone. I didn't even know you were Gareth Ravenswood until my mother's solicitor mentioned the arranged marriage with the master of Ravenswood Manor." The silence stretched between us like an unbridgeable chasm. I found myself studying her face, searching for traces of the woman I had known as Anna. She was thinner now, her cheeks slightly hollow in a way that spoke of sleepless nights and worry. Motherhood had changed her, but underneath I could still see the spirited woman who had debated philosophy with me by candlelight and laughed at my terrible attempts at cooking over an open fire. "The coincidence seems impossible," I finally managed to say. "Not coincidence," she replied, shifting Thomas to her other arm as he began to fuss softly. "When I learned of your identity through the marriage arrangement, I realized fate had intervened in the most unexpected way. My mother believes this union will provide security for both Thomas and myself, and legitimacy that my birth circumstances have always denied me." I moved closer, drawn by an inexplicable need to see the child more clearly. "May I?" She nodded, and I found myself looking down at a perfect miniature face. Thomas gazed up at me with solemn dark eyes, and something in my chest tightened with an emotion I couldn't name. One tiny fist escaped his swaddling and grasped reflexively at the air. "He has your hands," Lionel observed quietly. "The same long fingers, the same way of reaching toward things as if he already owns them." Without conscious thought, I offered my finger to the infant. His grip was surprisingly strong, and when his tiny fingers closed around mine, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. Whether this child was truly mine by blood or not, I realized I was already lost to him. "You said your mother arranged this marriage," I said, not taking my eyes from Thomas. "Does she know about what happened between us?" "No," Lionel replied firmly. "She believes Thomas is the result of a brief, unfortunate liaison with someone entirely different. She has no idea that my arranged bridegroom is also the father of her grandchild." The weight of secrets and implications pressed down on me. "And what do you want from this situation, Miss Ashworth? What outcome are you hoping for?" She was quiet for a long moment, and when I looked up, I saw something vulnerable in her expression that she was trying to hide. "I want what any mother wants. Security for my child. A name that will protect him from the cruelties that illegitimate children face. Beyond that." She paused. "I suppose I hope for kindness, if nothing else." Her modest expectations stung me more than demands would have. This was not a woman trying to trap me into marriage through deception or manipulation. She was simply a mother doing what she must to protect her child, and the resignation in her voice suggested she expected very little happiness for herself in the arrangement. "And if I were to refuse the marriage now that I know the truth?" I asked, though even as I spoke the words, I knew I could not abandon her or Thomas. "Then I would leave immediately, and you would never see either of us again," she replied with quiet dignity. "I would not force myself or my child upon someone who did not want us." The certainty in her voice revealed how much pride it had cost her to come here at all. This was a woman who had been rejected by society through no fault of her own, who had faced the scandal of unwed motherhood alone, and who was now dependent upon the charity of a man she had known for only 2 days 15 months ago. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button. I found myself remembering those 2 days with startling clarity now that the shock was wearing off. Anna, as I had known her then, had possessed a quick wit and genuine curiosity about the world that had fascinated me. She had listened to my dreams of improving agricultural methods on my estate with real interest, and had offered thoughtful suggestions that revealed an educated mind. She had also been remarkably easy to talk to, drawing out confidences I had never shared with anyone. "Thomas will need proper care," I said slowly, making my decision. "A nursery, a wet nurse if you are not feeding him yourself, warm clothing appropriate for the autumn weather." Hope flickered in her eyes, quickly suppressed. "You are willing to proceed with the marriage?" "I am willing to proceed," I confirmed. "But not as the cold business arrangement that was originally negotiated. If we are to do this, if we are to become a family, then we must do it properly." "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, hardly believing what I was about to propose. "I mean that we should try to make this a real marriage, Lionel. Not just a legal arrangement for financial benefit, but a genuine partnership. We clearly connected once before. Perhaps we can find that connection again." The surprise on her face was unmistakable. "You would be willing to court me, even knowing my circumstances?" "Your circumstances include my son," I pointed out. "And as for courting you, I believe I have already had that privilege, though neither of us realized it at the time." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, the first genuine expression of pleasure I had seen from her since her arrival. "You were rather persistent in your attempts to convince me that modern agricultural methods could revolutionize crop yields. And you were remarkably patient in listening to my theories about crop rotation," I replied, surprised by how easily we had fallen back into the familiar rhythm of conversation. "Patient enough to let you demonstrate your ideas by attempting to cook turnips 3 different ways over an open fire," she added, and suddenly we were both smiling at the memory. Thomas chose that moment to make his needs known with a lusty cry that echoed through the sitting room. Lina immediately shifted into the efficient movements of an experienced mother, checking his swaddling and making soft, soothing sounds. "He is likely hungry," she said apologetically. "I should see to his needs before we continue our conversation." "Of course," I replied, suddenly feeling awkward about the intimate realities of caring for an infant. "Mrs. Crawford can show you to the nursery, and I shall have her arrange for whatever you require." As if summoned by the mention of her name, my housekeeper appeared in the doorway with the timing that marked truly excellent domestic staff. "Sir," she said, "I have prepared the blue bedroom for Miss Ashworth and arranged a cradle in the adjoining dressing room for the infant. Cook wishes to know if there are any particular dietary requirements for the young lady." "Thank you, Mrs. Crawford, I replied. Please ensure that Miss Ashworth has everything necessary for the child's care. And perhaps you might send word to Dr. Pemberton to call this afternoon. I want to be certain the infant is in good health after the journey. Lionel looked surprised at my consideration. That is very thoughtful, but truly not necessary. Thomas is perfectly well. Nevertheless, I insist, I said firmly. He is my responsibility now, and I intend to take that responsibility seriously. Something shifted in her expression as she realized I was not merely accepting the situation, but actively embracing it. You really mean to acknowledge him? Publicly? He is my son, I said, the words coming easier each time I spoke them. Of course, I mean to acknowledge him. The relief that crossed her face was so profound it was almost painful to witness. How much fear must she have carried, wondering if her child would be rejected, if she would be forced to raise him alone and in shame. Then perhaps, she said softly, this arrangement might work better than either of us originally hoped. As Mrs. Crawford led her toward the stairs, I remained in the sitting room, trying to process everything that had changed in the space of a single morning. When I had awakened, I had been a reluctant bridegroom facing a marriage of convenience. Now I found myself the father of a 6-month-old infant and the prospective husband of a woman I had once thought I would never see again. The autumn rain had begun to fall against the windows, the sound somehow appropriate for the complex emotions churning through me. Part of me was terrified by the suddenness of these new responsibilities, but another part felt oddly relieved. The loneliness that had plagued me since my brother's death seemed less oppressive with the knowledge that this house would soon be filled with the sounds of family life. I walked to the window and watched the raindrops trace irregular paths down the glass. In a few hours, I would need to send word to Lionel's mother confirming our engagement. Tomorrow, I would need to speak with the vicar about posting the banns. Within a month, if all went according to plan, I would be a married man with a son to raise and a wife who was no longer a stranger. The thought should have been daunting, but instead I found myself oddly eager to begin this unexpected chapter of my life. The following days passed in a whirlwind of domestic adjustments that I could never have anticipated. Thomas proved to be a demanding but delightful presence in the manor. His cries echoed through halls that had been silent for too long, and his tiny sounds of contentment when Lina fed him created an intimacy I found both wonderful and slightly overwhelming. Dr. Pemberton's visit had confirmed what I already suspected, that the infant was indeed thriving under his mother's careful attention. More significantly, the elderly physician had taken one look at Thomas and remarked casually that he had my brother's eyes and the unmistakable Ravenswood chin. The observation had sent a surge of protective pride through me that surprised me with its intensity. Lina had settled into the daily rhythms of the house with remarkable grace. I would often find her in the morning room, feeding Thomas while she read from the small collection of books she had brought with her. Her presence transformed spaces that had felt merely functional into something approaching home. Our conversations during these first weeks were careful, but increasingly warm. We spoke of practical matters, of Thomas's needs, and the wedding preparations, but gradually we began to rediscover the easy discourse we had shared during our original encounter. She had opinions on everything from the management of tenant farmers to the latest developments in literature, and I found myself looking forward to our discussions with an eagerness I had not felt in years. But it was the quiet moments that affected me most deeply. Watching her rock Thomas to sleep in the evening, seeing her face soften with maternal love, observing the gentle competence with which she managed his care, I found myself falling under a spell I had not anticipated. This was not the convenient marriage I had agreed to, but something far more complex and potentially wonderful. 3 weeks after her arrival, as October painted the countryside in brilliant golds and russets, I made a decision that would either strengthen our growing bond or reveal the fragility of what we were building together. "Lina," I said over breakfast, where she sat with Thomas contentedly settled in her lap, "I would like to take you both to visit the village today. It is market day, and I think it is time for my neighbors to meet my family." The fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Your family?" "My wife-to-be and my son," I clarified, watching her face carefully. "Unless you have objections to such a public acknowledgement." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her weighing the implications. Taking her and Thomas to the village market would be tantamount to a public announcement of our engagement and my acceptance of the child. There would be no taking back such a declaration once it was made. "Are you certain you are prepared for the questions that will arise?" she asked finally. "People will want to know about Thomas, about our history." "Then we shall tell them the truth," I replied. "That we met, fell in love, and were separated by circumstances. That fate has now reunited us, and we intend to marry and raise our son together." Her eyes widened slightly at my casual reference to falling in love. It was the first time either of us had spoken the word aloud, though the feeling had been growing between us with each passing day. "Is that the truth?" she asked quietly. I reached across the table and covered her free hand with mine. "It is part of the truth, the part that matters most." The warmth of her smile in response made my chest tighten with an emotion I was only beginning to recognize as genuine love. Not the desperate passion of our original encounter, but something deeper and more sustainable. The kind of love that could weather the challenges of daily life and grow stronger with shared experiences. An hour later, we were settled in my carriage with Thomas bundled against the crisp autumn air. Lina wore her finest dress, a deep blue that complemented her coloring beautifully, and I had chosen my best coat and freshest cravat. If we were to make our debut as an engaged couple, we would do so properly. The village of Little Ashworth was bustling with its weekly market when we arrived. Farmers displayed their harvest produce, merchants hawked their wares, and neighbors gathered to exchange gossip and conduct business. Our arrival in the carriage immediately drew attention, as I had known it would. "Mr. Ravenswood," called out Mrs. Hartwell, the baker's wife, as I helped Lina down from the carriage. "How lovely to see you in the village! And who might this charming lady be?" "Mrs. Hartwell," I replied with a formal bow. "May I present Miss Lina Ashworth, my betrothed?" "Lina, this is Mrs. Hartwell, who bakes the finest bread in 3 counties." The introduction caused a visible stir among the nearby market-goers. I saw heads turn and whispers begin as news of my engagement spread through the crowd with the speed that only village gossip could achieve. "Miss Ashworth," Mrs. Hartwell repeated, her eyes taking in every detail of Lina's appearance and the infant in her arms. "How delightful. And this little one?" "This is Thomas," Lina replied with admirable composure. "My son?" "Your son," Mrs. Hartwell echoed, and I could practically see her mind working through the implications. "How lovely. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible historical love stories." I placed a protective hand on the small of Lina's back and smiled at Mrs. Hartwell with all the confidence I could muster. "Thomas is my son as well," I announced clearly. "We are to be married at the end of the month, and I could not be happier about expanding my family." The bold declaration had exactly the effect I had intended. Mrs. Hartwell's expression shifted from curiosity to something approaching approval, and I could see other villagers nodding thoughtfully as they processed this information. "Well," she said finally, "congratulations to you both. Thomas is a fine-looking child. He has the Ravenswood features, certainly." Other introductions followed, and I was pleased to note that while there was certainly curiosity about our circumstances, the general reception was warmer than I had dared to hope. The villagers had known me since childhood, and their respect for my family name apparently extended to accepting my choices in marriage and fatherhood. It was while we were examining a display of late-season apples that the first real challenge to our newfound happiness presented itself. "Gareth Ravenswood," came a voice I recognized with a sinking heart. I heard rumors, but I hardly dared believe them. I turned to face Lord Pemberton, a neighboring landowner whose estate bordered mine to the south. He was a man of strict moral principles and considerable influence in local society. His approval or disapproval could significantly impact how our marriage would be received by the gentry. "Lord Pemberton," I replied with careful courtesy. "Good morning." His pale eyes fixed on Lina and Thomas with unconcealed disapproval. "So the rumors are true. You intend to marry this person and claim her bastard as your own." The insult hit me like a physical blow, and I felt Lina stiffen beside me. Thomas, perhaps sensing the tension, began to fuss in his mother's arms. "Lord Pemberton," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "you will address my betrothed with the respect due to any lady, or you will not address her at all." "Lady?" he scoffed. She is the illegitimate daughter of a woman barely better than she should be, carrying a child whose father is anyone's guess. The rage that surged through me was so intense, I actually took a step forward before common sense reasserted itself. Creating a public scene would only damage Lyanna's reputation further, but I could not allow such insults to stand unchallenged. "The child's father is standing before you," I said with icy precision. "Thomas is my son, born of the woman I love and intend to marry. If you cannot accept that reality with grace, then perhaps we have nothing further to discuss." Lord Pemberton's face flushed red with anger. "You would throw away your family's good name for a whore and her brat?" This time I did step forward, my hands clenched into fists. "You will apologize immediately, or I will demand satisfaction." The threat of a duel caused a visible stir among the gathered villagers. Several people moved closer, sensing drama, while others hurried their children away from what promised to become an unpleasant confrontation. "Gareth," Lyanna said quietly, touching my arm. "Please. He is not worth it." But Lord Pemberton was not finished. "Look at her," he sneered. "She knows what she is. At least she has the grace to try to prevent you from making a complete fool of yourself." "Enough," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the market square. "Lord Pemberton, you have insulted my family and my honor. I demand that you apologize to Miss Ashworth immediately, or name your seconds." The challenge hung in the air between us like a sword. Dueling was illegal but still practiced among gentlemen, and everyone present understood the seriousness of what I was proposing. To back down now would be to accept his insults as justified. For a long moment, Lord Pemberton stared at me with undisguised contempt. Then his gaze shifted to Lyanna, who stood with quiet dignity despite the public humiliation she was enduring. "Very well," he said finally. "I withdraw my comments about the lady. But mark my words, Ravenswood. This marriage will be your ruin." With that, he turned and stalked away, leaving us standing in the center of a crowd of fascinated onlookers. The entire confrontation had lasted perhaps 5 minutes, but I knew its effects would ripple through local society for weeks to come. The ride home from the village was conducted in heavy silence. Thomas had fallen asleep in Lyanna's arms, blissfully unaware of the social storm that was brewing around his young life. But I could see the tension in every line of Lyanna's body, the way she held herself rigidly upright as if preparing for a blow that might come at any moment. It was not until we were safely within the walls of Ravenswood Manor that she finally spoke. "You should not have challenged him," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dueling is illegal, and even if it were not, Lord Pemberton has influence that you cannot afford to ignore." I helped her down from the carriage, noting how she avoided meeting my eyes. "Would you have preferred that I allow him to insult you without consequence?" "I would have preferred that we had never gone to the village at all," she replied, finally looking at me with eyes that held a pain I had not seen there before. "I tried to warn you about the questions that would arise, about the reactions we would face. You insisted that we could handle whatever came our way." Her words stung because they held a grain of truth. I had been naive in thinking that my acceptance of the situation would be enough to smooth our path through society. The reality was far more complicated and potentially dangerous than I had anticipated. "Lyanna," I began, but she shook her head. "No, Gareth. You must listen to me now, really listen. I have lived my entire life with the consequences of illegitimate birth. I know what people say, how they look at me, what they assume about my character. I can bear that for myself because I have learned to live with it. But I cannot bear it for Thomas." She shifted the sleeping infant in her arms, and I saw her hands trembling slightly. "He is innocent in all of this. He deserves better than to grow up hearing whispers about his mother's shame and his father's foolishness in acknowledging him." "His father's foolishness?" I repeated, feeling as if she had struck me. "Is that what you think this is? What else can it be?" she asked, and there were tears in her eyes now. "You barely know me, Gareth. 2 days 15 months ago, and 3 weeks of polite conversation. You have no idea who I really am, or what kind of woman you are binding yourself to." The despair in her voice cut through my anger and reached something deeper. This was not the confident, spirited woman I had known as Anna or the poised lady who had arrived at my door. This was someone who had been beaten down by years of social rejection, and was now terrified that her son would face the same fate. "Then tell me," I said, stepping closer. "Tell me who you really are, Lionel Ashworth." She looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing whether I could handle the truth she was about to reveal. "I am the daughter of a woman who fell in love with a married man," she said finally. "A woman who believed his promises that he would leave his wife, who waited for years for a divorce that never came. When I was born, my father provided financially for my upbringing but never acknowledged me publicly. I grew up in the shadow of his legitimate family, always aware that I was the shameful secret he kept hidden." She paused to adjust Thomas's blanket, her movements gentle despite her emotional turmoil. "My mother, God rest her soul, never stopped loving him. Even when it became clear that he would never marry her, she remained faithful to his memory. She raised me to be a lady, educated me as if I were legitimate, and always insisted that someday the right marriage would redeem our family's honor. The pieces of her history were falling into place, painting a picture of a childhood marked by isolation and unfulfilled promises. When I met you that night during the storm," she continued, "I felt for the first time in my life that someone saw me simply as a woman, not as a scandal or a burden. You spoke to me as an equal, listened to my thoughts as if they mattered. For 2 days, I experienced what it might be like to be worthy of genuine affection." Her voice broke slightly on the last words, and I felt my heart constrict with understanding. "Is that why you left without explanation?" I asked gently. "I left because I knew it could never be anything more than those 2 days," she replied. "You were clearly a gentleman of property and standing. I was nobody, the bastard daughter of a countess's cast-off mistress. I thought it would be kinder to both of us to end it before you discovered the truth about my circumstances. And then you found yourself with child." "Yes. And despite everything, I could not regret it. Thomas was created from the only genuine love I had ever known. I was determined to raise him alone if necessary, to give him all the affection and acceptance that I had been denied." The courage her confession revealed staggered me. She had faced pregnancy and motherhood entirely alone, with no support beyond what her mother could provide, and had never once considered trying to use her condition to trap me into marriage. When the marriage arrangement was proposed, she went on, "I agreed because it seemed like Providence offering Thomas the legitimacy and security I could never provide alone. I never imagined you would actually want to claim him as your son." "Why would I not want to claim him?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "Because admitting paternity would mean admitting to a liaison with a woman of my standing. It would be far simpler to marry me for the financial benefits and treat Thomas as an unfortunate necessity that came with the arrangement." Her assumption revealed how little she understood about the man I was trying to be. The idea of treating any child, much less my own son, as an unfortunate necessity was abhorrent to me. "Lionel," I said, reaching out to take her free hand. "Look at me." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to meet mine. "I do not care about your birth circumstances, or your mother's history, or what society thinks about our relationship. What I care about is the woman who challenged my ideas about agricultural reform, while helping me cook dinner over an open fire. What I care about is the mother, who has clearly devoted herself completely to her child's welfare. What I care about is building a real family with you and Thomas. Even if it costs you socially? Even if Lord Pemberton spreads his poison throughout the county? Especially then," I said firmly. "Do you think I want to be part of a society that would reject an innocent child or judge a woman by circumstances beyond her control? Let them gossip. Let them disapprove. We will prove them wrong by being happy." For the first time since the confrontation in the village, I saw hope flicker in her eyes. "You make it sound so simple," she said. "Perhaps it is simpler than we are making it," I replied. "We care for each other. We have a child who needs both his parents. We have the opportunity to build something meaningful together. Everything else is just noise. Share this with someone who loves a good romance story." That evening, as autumn rain drummed against the windows and a fire crackled in the hearth, I found myself in the nursery watching Lionel feed Thomas. The domestic scene had become one of my favorite parts of each day, a peaceful interlude that felt removed from the complications of the outside world. "I have been thinking about what happened today," I said quietly, not wanting to disturb Thomas, but needing to address the underlying issues that Lord Pemberton's attack had revealed. As have I, she replied without looking up from the infant. I keep wondering if I was wrong to come here, wrong to involve you in this situation. You are not wrong, I said firmly. But I think we need to be more strategic about how we handle the social challenges we are going to face. She looked up at me then, curiosity replacing some of the worry in her expression. What do you mean? I mean that we cannot simply ignore the gossip or hope that our happiness will be enough to silence the critics. We need allies, people of standing who will support our marriage and accept Thomas as my legitimate heir. And how do you propose we find such allies? She asked skeptically. By being completely honest about our situation with the people whose opinions actually matter, I replied. The vicar who will marry us, the magistrate who handles legal matters in this district, the physician who delivered Thomas. If we can gain their support, their voices will carry more weight than Lord Pemberton's spite. The idea was taking shape in my mind as I spoke. Rather than hiding from the truth or allowing others to create their own versions of our story, we would control the narrative by sharing it ourselves with carefully chosen confidants. It is a risk, Lioness said slowly. If even one of them rejects our explanation, then we will face that challenge when it comes, I said. But I would rather take the risk of honesty than spend our marriage hiding from shadows and wondering when the next attack will come. She was quiet for a long moment, considering my proposal while Thomas finished his feeding and settled into drowsy contentment. Very well, she said finally. We will try your approach. But Gareth, you must promise me something. Anything. If this strategy fails, if the social consequences become too severe, you must be prepared to send Thomas and me away. I will not allow our presence to destroy your life or your family's reputation. The suggestion that I would ever abandon them struck me like a physical blow. In the weeks since her arrival, they had become the center of my world, the reason I looked forward to each new day. That is not a promise I can make, I said quietly, because there are no circumstances under which I would willingly let either of you go. The next morning brought unexpected visitors that would either vindicate my strategy or destroy everything we had been building together. I was in my study reviewing estate ledgers when Mrs. Crawford knocked urgently at the door. Sir, she said, her face flushed with excitement. Dr. Pemberton is here with Reverend Matthews and Magistrate Thornfield. They wish to speak with you about a matter of some importance. My heart began to race as I realized the implications of this delegation. These three men represented the moral, religious, and legal authority of our district. If Lord Pemberton had reached them with his version of events, our situation could become untenable very quickly. Show them to the drawing room, I said, straightening my waistcoat, and ask Miss Ashworth to join us. Whatever they have come to discuss, she has a right to hear it. 10 minutes later, I found myself facing three of the most influential men in the county, while Lionel sat beside me, with Thomas sleeping peacefully in her arms. Her composure was admirable, but I could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. Dr. Pemberton spoke first, his weathered face creased with what might have been either concern or disapproval. Mr. Ravenswood, he began, we have come because certain allegations have been brought to our attention regarding your upcoming marriage and the paternity of this child. What manner of allegations? I asked, though I suspected I knew exactly what Lord Pemberton had told them. That you are being deceived about the child's parentage. Magistrate Thornfield interjected. That Miss Ashworth is using an infant of questionable origins to manipulate you into marriage for financial gain. The insult hit Lionel like a physical blow, and I saw her face go pale. But before I could respond, she stood with remarkable dignity, still holding Thomas. Gentlemen, she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. I understand your concerns, and I appreciate that you have come to address them directly rather than allowing gossip to flourish unchecked. However, I must correct your understanding of the situation. She looked at each man in turn, her gaze unwavering. Thomas is indeed Mr. Ravenswood's son, conceived during a chance encounter 15 months ago, when I was traveling under an assumed name. I did not seek out this marriage arrangement with knowledge of Mr. Ravenswood's identity. The discovery of our previous connection was as much a surprise to me as it was to him. Reverend Matthews leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. You admit to an illicit relationship outside the bonds of marriage? I admit to finding comfort and affection with a man I believed I would never see again. she replied without flinching. I make no apologies for the love that created this child, only for the circumstances that prevented us from marrying sooner. Her honesty was breathtaking in its completeness. Rather than trying to minimize or excuse what had happened, she was presenting the truth with a dignity that transformed potential scandal into something approaching nobility. Dr. Pemberton studied Thomas with professional interest. The child certainly bears a strong resemblance to the Ravenswood line, he observed. I commented on it when I examined him. The bone structure, the set of the eyes, even the way he holds his head, all very distinctive. Physical resemblance can be coincidental, Magistrate Thornfield pointed out, though his tone was less hostile than it had been moments before. It can be, I agreed, standing to face them directly. But in this case, it is not. Thomas is my son, born of the only woman I have ever truly loved. I claim him gladly, and will defend his legitimacy with my life if necessary. The room fell silent except for the soft sounds Thomas made in his sleep. These three men held enormous influence over how our marriage would be received in local society. Their approval could silence most criticism, while their disapproval could make our lives nearly impossible. Reverend Matthews spoke first, his voice gentle but probing. Mr. Ravenswood, are you marrying Miss Ashworth out of obligation, or because you genuinely wish to build a life with her? The question went to the heart of what everyone was wondering. Was this a marriage of convenience designed to legitimize an inconvenient child, or something deeper? Reverend, I said, reaching for Lina's free hand, I am marrying Miss Ashworth because my life is immeasurably better with her in it. Because she challenges me to be a better man, because she has already proven herself to be an exemplary mother, and because I cannot imagine a future without her and Thomas as part of it. And you, Miss Ashworth? Dr. Pemberton asked kindly. What are your feelings in this matter? Lina looked at me for a moment, and in her eyes I saw the reflection of everything we had shared, everything we had built together in these few precious weeks. I love him, she said simply. I loved him during those 2 days when I knew him only as a kind stranger who offered shelter from a storm. I love him now as the man who welcomed both my child and myself into his home without reservation. I love him enough to walk away if my presence would damage his standing, and I love him enough to stay and fight for our happiness if he will have me. The profound sincerity in her voice seemed to affect all three men. I saw Magistrate Thornfield's stern expression soften, and Reverend Matthews actually smiled. Well then, the Reverend said, rising from his chair, it seems to me that this is precisely the kind of love that the Church exists to bless and protect. Mr. Ravenswood, Miss Ashworth, you have my full support for your marriage, and I shall be honored to perform the ceremony. Dr. Pemberton nodded approvingly. Any fool can see that the child thrives under both your care. He is clearly loved and well tended, which is more than can be said for many legitimate heirs I have encountered. Magistrate Thornfield was the last to speak, and his words carried particular weight given his role in upholding social order. Lord Pemberton painted a very different picture of this situation, he said slowly. He spoke of deception and manipulation, of a fortune hunter using an illegitimate child to trap an honorable man. What I see before me is nothing of the kind. He stood and offered a formal bow to both of us. You have conducted yourselves with honor throughout this interview. Your love for each other, and for the child is evident, and your commitment to building a proper family is admirable. You have my blessing and my support. The relief that flooded through me was so intense I felt momentarily lightheaded. These three men had just given us something more precious than gold, the social validation that would allow us to live freely and raise Thomas without shame. Thank you, I managed to say. All of you. Your support means more than you can possibly know. After they departed, Lina and I found ourselves alone in the drawing room with Thomas, who had awakened and was regarding us with his solemn dark eyes. We did it, she said wonderingly. They believed us. They accepted us. They accepted the truth. I corrected gently, which is that we are a family in every way that matters. She turned to face me, and in her expression I saw something that had been missing since her arrival, the complete absence of fear about our future. Gareth, she said softly, I need to tell you something I should have said weeks ago. What is it? I love you. Not just as Thomas's father, not just as the man who has offered a shelter and security. I love you as the person you are, as the man you have chosen to be in accepting us. I love you enough to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the faith you have shown in us." Her words filled a hollow place in my chest that I had not even realized existed. This was not the desperate gratitude of a woman with no other options, but the free choice of someone who knew her own mind and heart. "And I love you," I replied, pulling her and Thomas into my embrace. "I love your courage, and your intelligence, and your devotion to our son. I love the way you have transformed this house from a place where I merely existed into a home where I truly live." We were married 3 weeks later in the village church, with half the county in attendance to witness what had become one of the most romantic stories anyone could remember. The same people who might have whispered about scandal instead spoke admiringly of a love that had overcome every obstacle. Thomas, now 7 months old and growing more charming by the day, gurgled contentedly throughout the ceremony from Mrs. Crawford's arms. When Reverend Matthews pronounced us husband and wife, our son seemed to approve with a delighted laugh that made the entire congregation smile. As we walked from the church as man and wife, with Thomas riding proudly in his father's arms, I reflected on the strange turns that had brought us to this moment. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had become the greatest love story of my life. That evening, as we stood together in our bedroom watching Thomas sleep in his cradle nearby, Lina spoke the words that perfectly captured what we had built together. "We are not the family anyone expected us to be," she said quietly, "but we are exactly the family we were meant to be." Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the world in pristine white that seemed to promise new beginnings and fresh starts. Inside our warm home, our unconventional but deeply loving family settled into the peaceful rhythm of a happiness that no one could take away from us. The lesson that our story taught was one that would serve us well throughout our long and joyful marriage, that love recognizes no barriers save those we create ourselves, and that the most meaningful families are often those built not just on blood, but on choice, commitment, and the courage to stand together against whatever challenges the world might offer. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more amazing stories like this one, because everyone deserves to believe in the power of love to overcome any obstacle.